Thanks for watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Pedagogy, Pixels and the Power of Writing on the Late Show with myself, James Radburn. It is Friday, the 6th of June, and I've got some fascinating guests who are going to join us on this conversation as we dive into the power of talk and how writing and technology can interweave and some of the challenges that we're going to have in the current world. We're going to dive into the foundation, overlooked role of talk in learning, the quiet erosion of classroom conversation, the challenging of nurturing thoughtful writing in this AI world, and how we're pulling back the curtain on what really matters in school tonight. So joining me are two experienced directors of educators, just leaders not in strategy, but they have the practice of purposeful pedagogy within their school. So we're going to evolve and talk about the evolving balance between talk, reading, writing, and technology, and where they believe we're getting it right and where we may be getting it wrong. So good evening. Let's go first. Shireen, good evening to you, and really glad you're on tonight. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well. Thank you, James. Looking forward to talking about talk, writing, everything I'm passionate about.
Fantastic. And Julie as well, welcome to you. I know you've had a busy day. You've been in London today. So thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, it was exciting. So I was at Apple today with Strategic Leads Forum, and there's no pressure after that introduction as well, James, is there? So, thanks for that from me and Shireen.
So let's go into a little bit about both of your backgrounds and where you have come from, and almost what's your purpose, what you feel your purpose in the role of education is. Because I feel like we get to a stage often in our teaching careers and when we're leaders, and we think actually there's this one essence that we really want to bring to the forefront, something that we're really passionate about, whether we're influenced by our own experiences or by our children or by what we're seeing in our locality as well. So, Shireen, can you give us and our listeners a little bit of a walkthrough of your career, where you are and what you're really thinking about in terms of this space at the moment?
Thanks so much, James. Hello, listeners. I'm Shireen. As you said before, I'm Executive Director of Education for Leo Academy Trust. I've been in education for 23 years, so quite a while. I often have to say that, James and Julie, because people don't believe me. So I'm just, maybe it's a compliment or not, I'm not sure, but I thought I'd add that in. I'm absolutely passionate about children who are from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds doing well in education. I'm really passionate about that. And if we can get it right for those children, then we can get it right for everybody. The other thing that I really embrace and enjoy is developing others. So whether that be pupils or whether that be teachers, if somebody's got a job and they've been promoted, that's something that keeps me going. One of my other things is that I write educational books for children, for teachers, and for parents. And I've been doing that for over a decade. And again, that's about empowering parents, empowering teachers and pupils to do their very best. So that's I'm sure I'll talk a little bit more about myself as we go through the show, but just to give you an overview of what I do. Thanks, James. Thanks, Julie.
And I think that social, economic and getting it right for them is going to be a theme that will go throughout this, because we all talk about that first 20% of pupils, and it is those often from that background where talk isn't as rich in their environment. They haven't been exposed to it. And we know if we get that right in the classroom, it will thrive as well, and the theme that will come throughout this. But Julie as well, can you give us a little bit of context for you, your role, and the work you're doing at Woodland Trust as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very similar to Shireen actually with my reasons. I have been in education for coming up for 30 years now, which is making me feel incredibly old. I've been kind of headship position upwards for the last 20 years. My role as Director of Education, I have the absolute privilege of working across our schools, and I lead the whole strategy for education, standards, curriculum, pedagogy, particularly tech and AI, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But my driver is absolutely that socio-economic and providing children with those opportunities that they might not otherwise get. Because how do we, find out what those little gems of talent and things that they might not discover they have otherwise? That's our role as educators, actually, to be able to open up those worlds for them, and particularly inclusion as well, and being advocates for families and children with a whole range of SEND. The tech and AI bit is quite funny because I've never been a tech person. My husband, tells me often not to touch the Hoover or the television because I break them every time I touch them. My dad was massively into tech and AI. He was, head of Department of Computing, lectured in AI, worked on the first chatbot in the 60s. And I think I was a massive disappointment to him that I was not interested in tech and AI at all. So, we spend a lot of time laughing around the fact that this is now my absolute passion, because I can really see, particularly around the inclusion aspect and children who are underprivileged, how it opens up education to them.
Fascinating. Full circle then for you, Julie, in terms of that career.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's something you probably never anticipated you would get to either.
No, not at all. It's kind of, I'd like to say it's kind of happened accidentally, just because of an opportunity that I had around PD, and then the opportunity to put that into practice, which is around the use of iPads as one-to-one devices across our trust. So we're one-to-one iPads. We're a regional training centre for Apple, for Kent and Bexley. We've got one Apple Distinguished School at the moment, hoping for more. We'll watch this space. We've got the AI Gold Quality Mark from Good Future Foundation as well. And it really drives our pedagogy and practice.
Fascinating. Brilliant. So I just want to point out to our listeners that this show would not be possible without some of our sponsors as well. So this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So you can level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. We use the code JCTTR2425. That's JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. I've got a full bookshelf behind me, and I need some more space for the current books that I've got on my list already. And to hear more about some of the Teachers Talk radio shows, please sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's called Soundbites and Insights, and it is delivered to over 10,000 educators weekly. It contains a curated selection of the 4 standout TTR shows within a week, inclusive discounts like the one from John Catt, and exclusive offers from our sponsors. So if you want to sign up for that, please go to ttradio.org/newsletter. So let's explore this idea of talk and why talk in the classroom really matters. In the age of voice notes and smart speakers, part of everyday life now, the way children are learning to speak and the interacting is shifting. And sometimes in ways we don't really fully notice until they're sitting in the classroom. There is research that shows like that excessive screen time in preschoolers is linked to delays in cognition and language development, while that structured digital interaction like singing or video calling can enhance early communication if used purposefully. All we have to do is think back to the time of COVID, and you remember my own daughter, and Shireen, I know you've got a son in reception as well, and the impact actually conversations at that point had a massive impact on their development. So let's start with you, Shireen. Have you noticed a change in the quality and confidence of children's talk as they enter school compared to a few years ago? And where do you think the role of COVID has played within that as well?
Yeah, I think the children who came straight out of COVID were really impacted. And I know just from having my son, he didn't even want to go to anyone who wasn't me or, my husband. So definitely that generation. What we're finding now in our schools in reception, and in nursery, is that there's a huge difference between those children who went to nursery and the children who are coming straight into school. That's what we're finding a huge difference on. We're working really hard on our communication, language, and literacy within the early years, and really thinking about those back and forth interactions with very young children, really thinking about the stories that we're reading to the children, how we're modeling that fluency, and also just using that technology so that they can play back, for example, if they've recorded a story. Or today I listened to some reception children recalling their knowledge of the life cycle, and then that was being recorded and that can be played at home so that we can have discussions at home around the key learning. And so, yes, I have seen the impact of COVID, particularly for older children, but more so, we're seeing the difference between children who attend nursery and children who don't attend nursery. So, when I ever see children who are out and about, whether it be neighbours, we've got this social responsibility. I say, has your child, have you utilised the 2-year-old funding or the 3-year-old funding so that those children can be in nursery at least 2 hours each day? So I think it's really important to do those back and forth interactions to really develop that communication, language, and literacy. And in our trust, we've sought specialist advice and we've got specialist training. We've run it across the trust as well as it being on leaders' school development plans. So that has been a huge focus, not just in early years, but across the school as well.
And Julie, from your perspective as well, have you seen a change within how children are coming in, and how have you had to adapt to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. And I think one of the things that we do as well is we screen all of our reception children around speech and language, and then allocate whether they need interventions or speech and language therapy. So we're trying to catch them as early as we can as well. I think as well, part of it is there's a couple of different drivers around it. So absolutely, COVID had the impacts, and I think it's really amplified it. They were cut off from wider social networks. They were only with, they didn't see their extended family, or have, when you go to the shops and you have those little chats and you're talking to children while you stood in the queue to pay for your shopping, all of that went. And I think there's also around, reduction in some areas of, all the children's centres closed. There's not the free stay and play groups or toddlers groups anymore. So for those families who can't afford to put their children into nursery, even though there is the 2-year-old funding, but kind of before that as well, so that they're immersed in really rich language from an early age, that's gone now, or it's really difficult to access. And I think the other aspect is it's quite structural. So RSC hasn't always had a formal place in the curriculum. So yes, it's part of literacy, but a school can choose not to spend as much time on RSC. So I think, to have it really embedded into what you do and take that stance, which is what we do as a trust, same as Leo, around RSC is a key driver for us, then that's important to make sure it's held centrally so that we can really support our children's development.
It'd be really good, Shireen, for you then to build on that in terms of, sorry, I'm ABCs in my head now. I said that was obviously, that's really, sorry. When you're a primary school teacher, you've had all of that through you. You just have this in your head, and you don't mean to do it with adults, but you end up doing it, don't you? It's quite funny. But how does that? Because I know we've done ORC 21 and other projects out there in the country around focusing on ORC. So how have you made it central to what you've done? You talked about some of the things you've done in early years, but how have you made it a central place within the curriculum and put it to the forefront where previously it may not have been?
Yeah, so first of all, it starts off with your strategic plan. So we've made, I'm going to call it oral language, if that's okay, James. We've made oral language an absolute focus in terms of our strategic planning. So it's a whole trust approach, and we've tackled it at all levels. So the first one is, yes, we started with communication, language, and literacy support and training for our youngest learners, but then we've also provided training for every single year group across the trust. So with our Director of English, we've written training for general oral language, what it is, the different aspects of it, and then we've gone into the subject-specific aspects. So what we might call disciplinary talk or disciplinary oracy. There's all sorts of words going around. I'm calling it disciplinary talk at the moment, but I'm sure there are other terms that are being used. And we've also utilised experts. So we've had science experts, we've had history experts, art experts, and we've asked them everything they do, we've asked them to lead through talk. Then we've done training for every single subject, and every subject has got to show how talk and debate and what that looks like within their subject. So we've tackled it at all different angles. And this week and the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be reviewing. So my focus is on oral language, disciplinary talk, or disciplinary writing, because we look at writing across the curriculum. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. And we will evaluate the impact of that training. So we know 98% of the training has been rated as 4s or 5s to be the highest in terms of impact. But that's something we've really focused on, and also written our own materials. So as much as, yes, you say there are other aspects out there, but we've written it to be very individualized for our trust, and very much what our trust needed in our next steps. So our next steps were to develop debate across the curriculum. We had everything else in place, but we needed to make sure that that debate was there across the curriculum. So that was very specific to our trust. And yes, so we've got visitors coming from across the country. We've had just like you, Julie, we've had the Department for Education come to visit us to look at technology, but also oracy. We've been on various groups. I've worked on various things in terms of talk and writing with the Department for Education. And equally, our digital lead has also worked on AI with Sir Kevan Collins with the Department for Education. So again, what we're doing is we're sharing it nationally as well. So it's been good. We've enjoyed it, and hopefully our children, and that's the most important bit, will really be confident about speaking across the disciplines or the subjects.
I'll add my own ABC onto that if you, James, and build on that as well. And this is why I really enjoy talking with Shireen, because our approaches are so similar. So her London schools and our London schools are involved in the Mayor of London's Violence Reduction Unit oracy project, which starts with training for reception, which we've also rolled out across the rest of our year groups, and it's then going to track those children into later life to see if it reduces suspensions and permanent exclusions, because the idea behind it is actually if they've got great oracy skills, then they're going to be able to have conversations and discourse and verbal disagreements rather than turning it into something physical, because they haven't got any way of expressing themselves differently. So we've done really similar with the, sentence stems, dialogic scaffolds, safe spaces to rehearse, and that's where tech really comes in. So, from reception upwards, it's around our children use it for oral rehearsal, they're presenting, they're recording, and they're not judged. They don't feel judged. So when I talk to the pupils about why do you prefer talking into a device rather than presenting in front of the class, they said, well, actually, I can do it safely. I'm not worried about what my friends think until I get it right. And then when I'm confident with it, I can then talk to everybody else and present in front of them. So I think that really develops their confidence, and we've done the same about mapping it out in the curriculum. So there's really clear places in each of our subjects where actually we expect talk. And it's also around the tech training about how do we use talk to how do we use the tech to enhance the talk in the classroom? And that's something I quite often talk around to people who say, well, surely having one-to-one devices stops talk or stops collaboration. Well, actually, it's completely the opposite. And we've got some really good stats around that from our pupils who say, no, it's purposely planned. That's the key. So then they have all of those opportunities there.
And yeah, I was going to say, like, we haven't actually answered the question, like, why is talk important and why is debating in particular a really useful tool in our arsenal of when we're talking about oracy in particular. And you said, Julia, about the fact that they will be able to have those disagreements. Are there any other reasons, Shireen, that you think talk and debating in particular is an important thing that we should embed in the curriculum and something that we should advocate?
Yeah, I just want to build on what Julie said, because obviously both of our trusts are using talk as a vehicle to reduce violence, which is an interesting concept, actually. Talk has that social justice element. So it's about children having a voice and being able to say and express their opinions. And I think, like Julie, when we're working with particularly disadvantaged pupils from socioeconomically, I don't want to call children disadvantaged pupils, but children with disadvantage. I had to correct myself there. There's different aspects. So we've got the social justice, having a voice when something's wrong, standing up for ourselves. But one of the best things about talk, I think, is that it develops critical thinking skills. And critical thinking is really important in the digital age. So if we've got that really good curriculum where we're developing their knowledge, we're reading stories to teachers, then that helps children with critical thinking. That helps children to think, is that right? Is it wrong? Is my source correct? Is it not correct? And so talk is big. Oral language is big. It's bigger. It's the social aspect. It's working in partners with others, which some children find a little bit more difficult. But I wanted to echo also what Julie said in terms of being able to speak into a device is particularly powerful for those children who perhaps don't feel as confident. And that they can practice, they can hear it back, which then impacts on their writing because they're able to listen to stories, and then they're able to listen back, hear stories to support them with their writing. I mean, we're going to be talking now, but I just wanted to sort of add that for the listeners.
I think that's really important. The low stakes element of technology is a huge thing, isn't it? And I remember a child when I was in year 5 who wouldn't really say anything within the classroom environment, but I knew there was a spark or something inside him. And we had these class assemblies at the time, big productions almost come up on. It was an assembly script written and it was a performance of anything around what they've done. And this child, I wanted them to have a role. And I knew he wasn't going to stand on stage in the large primary school with all the parents. So we decided he was the news anchor and recorded it. And it was the most I ever saw him speak. He was articulate. He did it with his friends completely independently, just because there was a device there and it was the right environment for him. And what was fascinating was actually seeing his mum's reaction to it, as well as his reactions when we showed it. And it was just not only pride, but actually he has got that talk within him. And it's just making sure that we can find a way that we can articulate. And even children with self-regulation are trying to calm and articulate their thoughts and feelings. And even just thinking about my daughter the other day going to trampolining and her reaction to it and the breathing techniques and the mindfulness we did it. When she could articulate and think about, actually, this is how I feel and why I feel it, there was a huge impact there as well. And I wondered if you got any examples of the children, and I like the idea of the critical thinking. We may come back to that in a bit, but any examples where you've seen actually children have come out of their shell because they now have the tools to help them talk?
Absolutely. So there's a really great story in one of our schools with one of our ex-year 6 children who is now in high school. And she was on the kind of junior leadership team, but she didn't like to, she was painfully shy. And for the first part of it, they would give out tokens in assembly. So they stand at the side, they spot children being good and give out tokens, but they'd have to say why they were giving the tokens. Well, she didn't do it. She refused for the majority of the year to give out these tokens because she couldn't have that conversation with somebody she didn't know to say why. Then towards the end of the year, there was, the School's Got Talent that every school has, I think, in the summer term. And the junior leadership team were tasked with organising it. And I mean, it was an absolutely brilliant show. And it turned out she had organised the whole thing, because her voice was, I can organise everything digitally. I can send the right messages out to people. We can mind map everything on there. We can do whatever's needed. She didn't have to do any of the physical presenting, but we didn't know that she was that skilled at being able to do all of that. And it really, after that, she found her voice, and it was amazing. And her mum says she's doing really well, because we've got the younger sibling. Her mum says how well she's doing at high school now, because something just clicked with her. And, it just for that one child, it's worth it, never mind everybody else.
Yeah, can I just add an example, Julie? Thank you for that. It's so transformational. I'll give an example from one of our younger pupils. So, sort of age 5, etc., which James, I know you'll know about. So we had a pupil who was elective mute, who didn't speak in school at all. But in order for their story to be recorded, they had to speak into their one-to-one device. And of course, they have to say it loudly, because the device won't be able to hear you. And for the first time, that teacher actually heard the child speak. And I think that's transformational, that the technology had supported that child to be confident, because they weren't speaking to a human being, they were speaking to a device, and they had to use a higher voice in order to be heard. So I love things like that within our school. And that's when, I know we might talk about this later, but that's when you need to know your why, about why you're using the technology. And some of it children need to have. And, we often say it's necessary for some, but useful for all. And actually, some children do need it. So, we can explore that a little bit later on in terms of that assistive technology. But for some children, it is transformational.
And so let's pivot a little bit, because I know I think we could just talk for hours here, the three of us, about our experiences and all of this. But we often say that to be a writer, you first must be a reader. But in the world of like social media, where you get instant gratification and we're scrolling through, are we losing that love and deep, avid readers within our school? I'll start with you, Julie. What do you think around that, and what have you done to advocate that reading culture, especially when it is so easy now to scroll things through and not necessarily have the stamina as well?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because we just work really hard for that not to happen. So we're not seeing a lack of love of reading. In fact, our children love reading more. And, we've taken the steps which lots of places have done around having core texts right through our curriculum, which connect with the children's, loves and diversity. But it's the tech that is actually supporting us as well with the love of reading. So we've got the traditional reading with story time in the classrooms, whether they're reception or whether they're year 6. And, you can walk in the classroom and hear a pin drop. But for those children who find that difficult, then the use of tech means actually while they're reading, they can have a look at a simplified version maybe. They could maybe follow along kind of with picture prompts with it. We've also got audio books for some of our children. So they're still getting that really rich vocabulary and love and imagination and that development, but they just prefer to hear it rather than read it, but they're still having those connections. Things such as, sometimes while they're reading the text and really enjoying the text. The digital work just helps them a little bit with a bit more scaffolding. If they come across a word that they don't know and not sure what to do about it, the tech can help them without them having to put the book down, go away and get a dictionary, which then gives other issues around, actually, can I understand that word in the dictionary and the meaning of it? Also getting a nudge question, maybe if they're not sure about what something is saying, or that what the intent of that bit of the book is. And the key with that is it's done really discreetly and effectively, so they have real dignity in their learning. It's not that everybody's reading out loud and we can hear you can't say that word. It also, we'll record videos of staff reading to children, so then we're really role modeling that for some of our families as well. We particularly did that during COVID. We had story time all the time and sent that out, but we've continued with that. Some of our children do podcasts about books that they've really enjoyed, and then share that across our trust. And what's more powerful, no one's going to listen to me saying, well, I thought that was a great book. But if they've got somebody else in a parallel year 5 class saying, well, this was great, these are the reasons why, we love this character, we didn't like this one, then they're going to pick up that book and go and read it. So I think the tech can really support developing that love and that passion, and building. We have all the usual things like reading ambassadors, book corners, but I think the tech has just given it that extra enhancement.
What are your experiences then, Shireen, of that? Because I think you're right, primary schools in particular, and mainly from my experience and our experience together, that reading has always been there, hasn't it? It's always been a culture of reading, and it's always been a push as practitioners. But I think you're right. I've seen children who wouldn't want to do a book review, wouldn't want to talk about it, but actually doing a quick video or a 30-second video, like, you've got to talk about this book, try and put these points in, try and use this language and hook a reader in. Brilliant. And it's that in some ways has been real advocacy of reading as well, and tech has enhanced it. And the other way of it is when you're using a digital platform, and you alluded to that in there, Julie, that they're listening. So whether it's not just reading, but reading within the curriculum, whether it is in history or whether you're listening and reading within MFL, for example, they can read, but they can listen and hear the pronunciation, hear that some of that tier 2, tier 3 language, use it in context and start to use it themselves. So what experiences have you had of reading within your trust, and how has technology potentially played a role in enhancing it, Shireen?
Absolutely. Building on what Julie said, we definitely have all of that, where children have dignity in particular. And if they can't read something, then of course they can listen to it on their one-to-one device. They can look up particular words in terms of vocabulary that they don't understand. They can use something to help them to just focus in on particular sections of pieces of writing, exactly the same as Julie. We also have live radio station that children, it's kind of linked to reading, but children can use the talk and oral language so that they can share their views and thoughts across, and can record live. So that really supports them. We also have a program where we have an online library so the children can access books at home as well as in school. So that's been particularly important. So our kind of motto, which isn't a new one, and I think most schools probably use it across the country, is that reading is the golden thread. So we have exactly what Julie said. We have read aloud, but we also have books to introduce concepts in terms of, if you're learning about the weather, then we'll have a book on the weather so the children can access and understand that. We definitely have that across our trust. But also what we do is we develop those strategies for reading that are specific to a particular topic. So how do you read like a scientist? How do you read like a mathematician? How do you read like a historian? And look at those aspects that might be slightly different, particularly for our older children. And that's been particularly powerful as well, that reading across the curriculum. And that was commented on when we had our visitors. You know which ones they are. I won't mention them. But they did say that the reading, particularly in mathematics, was particularly strong, where the children were reading problems and able to articulate their thoughts and opinions. So echoing everything that Julie has said and just adding a few more things. Can I just add though, James, that we always talk about reading and how that impacts on writing, but I was reading some research around actually writing can impact on reading and talk. So if you've written about something and you've understood it, particularly across the curriculum, then that will help you and set you up well to talk about it. So sometimes we have to look at, we always start with reading, but actually if we're writing about something we've learned, then that embeds it, we're able to express it, and it actually supports us with talking about it. So when you said to me, how do you know these things off by heart? Because I've written about them. So if I've written blogs or I've written papers or whatever, I'm not going to say, exactly, then I'm more confident to talk about things. Let's think in there, James.
Yeah, no, let's explore that, because I think that's where it's really important. Because I wrote down reading across the curriculum, and now you're talking about writing across the curriculum. And when you've got information abundancy at your fingertips, how do we know that actually children have comprehended it? They've mastered in maths or mastered being a scientist or a historian. So how does writing and then let's say reading, but in particular writing, work across the curriculum, and how does it work across these interdisciplines of being a historian or a scientist, and why is it important that we take those personas? So it's not an English lesson in history or not an English lesson in science, but actually we're writing as a scientist.
James, you just asked me something that I've been working on for the last 2 years. I'm not allowed to
perfect answer then, Shireen, coming up.
I've written about it. I'm not mentioning any names about what I've written, but definitely that's one of my specialisms. We really worked hard on that at Leo Academy Trust. My trust. Basically, the writing across the curriculum is about what you've learned and what you're showing, what you can know and can do. And it's not every single day. Children might not do a longer piece of writing because you're writing all the time, aren't you? But let's take history. They're doing history. They might do a longer piece of history writing 3 times a year, because it's about quality, not quantity. And that 3 times a year, that piece of writing is about what the children have learnt. So if they've learnt, let's think about the disciplinary knowledge or the subject-specific skills. If they've learnt about cause and consequence, or they've learnt about why a particular person is significant within the curriculum, then that's what they will write about. So once they've written about that, they've got the content for, a 6-week unit of work. I know schools are all different. Then they'll be writing like a historian. They're not going to be writing diaries from the point of view of characters in history, because that's not the history discipline. They're going to be writing within the discipline. And once they've done that, children are much more confident at producing online videos. I think I can say videos. Online videos, so that they can show what they can know and can present to the rest of the class. So again, that writing is also supporting them with their oral language across the curriculum and giving them that sense of debate. But I could go on about this for the next hour, but hopefully that gives you a summary, unless you've got a few more questions.
No, I'm interested in the fact that, do you think, and not necessarily, this may not be a primary, this may be further afield as well, do you think, either of you, that writing, there's a risk to losing the art of writing? So for example, you can use AI to create your essay or your assignment or your writing thing, and why is writing still such an important tool and something that we should be doing? Like, I'm writing now on a piece of paper here. I type, I write in lots of different ways all the time, and as you say, it's a way for me to think about it. I have to use it to articulate. I use talk to do the same things. I use AI tools to even summarize my key points, and when I'm just talking around something and write it out, I do all of those myself. But do you think there's a danger that students don't see the value of writing potentially, and actually they may find shortcuts? I'll start with you, Julie.
It's a really interesting question, because I think around it's writing as a whole. So for us, script writing, if they're making an iMovie, for instance, then that's still a writing skill because there's so many different elements within that. And it's all around purpose. That's the key. Once children have that purpose for writing, and the tech is about enhancing it. So it's not about replacing it. So I might, for instance, be thinking, I don't know how to start this sentence. So I might ask my AI, if I've got a chatbot, for instance, I might put that in and say, give me some sentence starters to describe a setting. But then I'm the writer. I will have to look at those. And going back to what you were saying, Shireen, before about the critical thinking, I'm then going to have to think, right, which one fits what I'm writing best? Which one suits the audience? Which one suits the purpose of the writing? Can I think of better words than that? Actually, it's just a suggestion to get me started. So I think the tech can really support that, especially for those children who might really struggle around like those starting points, because AI can support them with, actually, this is how I'm going to get started. I think when you become over reliant on it and you stop thinking, that's the point of danger. So actually I'm using it, but it's going to make me think even more. It's giving me that prompt, but the minute I stop thinking and just copy it, then yeah, it's an absolute danger. But I think our role as educators is to teach the children, these are the reasons you need it. And you can see when you're doing writing with the children, the impact that it has on them. So there was a project in one of our schools a few years ago around bees and saving bees, and they wrote letters to the MP to say persuasive writing, these are the reasons you should be saving the bees, this is what you should be doing about it. And actually he went and presented something in Parliament, and the children watched it live. So you can imagine that's from their writing actually, and how that made them feel and the opportunities that gave them. Those children love writing, they're continuing writing now, then they're not going to stop because they've seen that real purpose behind it.
I've just written a phrase I often use, is that cognitive offloading. We shouldn't be doing the cognitive offloading to technology. We should be using it within that process. So if you think about the process of writing in particular, where do you think the process where technology can support that process? Is it through the ideation? Is it through the being able to put a piece of writing in and see actually the imagery of what it's creating, or whether it is through the language development in there? Where do you think, Shireen, that you've seen where technology could support that writing process? Because we've talked about writing is really important. It helps us to build up our schema. It helps us with the purpose of it, and that helps us to articulate and talk about it and read further within a topic. But where do you think, technology may be able to fit within there, and where have you seen some good examples?
Yeah, we use technology. There's various options out there, but we use a particular app that supports children with having the tools they need for writing. So it might have examples of what a good piece of writing looks like. It might have a word bank that you need. You might be able to go into the world and look at the virtual world. We also use AI for generating images. I think everybody's enjoying those. So you write the text and then it generates the image to go with it, and you can tweak it. And children have really valued that. We have also used AI in a closed program, so not open, not generative AI, where it gives feedback on their writing. We're definitely having a go with that one. But it's checked by the teacher first, so we don't just give out that feedback on the writing without it being checked by the teacher as well, and that's saving time. And we're also using AI to support teachers with making assessments as well. We don't use it so much in year 6 because of the statutory assessments in year 6 and the writing, but we definitely use that in Key Stage 2, not so much in Key Stage 1. So those are just, I think I've answered your question, James, just some of the examples. So the drafting process is definitely where we use the technology for writing, and the drafting process, and also to go into other worlds. We have programs where you can visit different countries, and that will give you the ideas behind it. I don't want to mention any products, so I'm being careful. But that's definitely where we've seen the most impact, that you can bring all of your resources rather than when I first started. I'm sure you, Julie, as well. And James, we'd have like on your table, you'd have all your word banks and everything else. We have that on the one-to-one device that our children have.
I think that access to technology is huge, isn't it? Because otherwise you'll be at the photocopy, you'll be printing things, how they emerge through the sound or through the imagery. And actually, we never should start with a blank sheet of paper, and actually having it for that drafting and that inspiration, that initial drafting process is huge. Before I come to you, Julie, about your perspective on that, just wanted another shout out to our sponsors who have made this show possible and have both Julie and Shireen on. It's John Catt. The show to you is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles and use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Julie, go on. Where have you seen technology? I know you're eager.
I know. I was like, oh, what do you mean you're going to stop me from talking? Hang on. So it's around the editing process in particular. So one of the programs that we use, we had a unexpected consequence from that. So the idea behind it was, the writing would be uploaded, teachers could use it, it would, really quickly assess the children's work. There'd be whole class feedback as well as individual feedback. But then what we found the children were doing was they were uploading it themselves to get that first draft of feedback, and then they could then edit their work. But some of our children who are EAL were then translating it into their preferred language. So then they can have a really great understanding of what they were being asked to do, or suggestions on improving their writing, which they could then kind of work backwards to do the writing in English. So and then also have that feedback read to them as well. So there's a whole host of kind of those things that are happening. And I think for us, it's around modeling the creative process. So, tech can do the idea generation, drafting, refining, but it's around that creative part of it, really, which needs to be that human element, because it's that spark of human originality. And I've got a great anecdote for another time about my Morris Dancing Doctor Who script, just in case Russell T Davies is listening. I can share that.
I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
I don't think
you won't be when you see it.
Oh, that's great. I've completely lost my train of thought now that you've said that. No, absolutely. I know we're primary school practitioners, like by default at the moment, and that's what we're thinking out with our schools and trusts that we're working with. But do you think we're talking about how all of us are purposely thinking about the use of AI and where it goes within it, and we're not offloading all the cognition, and it's not doing all the work for us. But let's go to the other extreme. And if you look at the statistics at university and through that realm, where people are using AI almost to create and do their assignments and dissertations for them, and they will have some human in the loop of them checking bits and pieces. How can then we make sure, and what do we need to teach our children and our staff in particular to make sure that we are using it throughout the process and the iterative approach to it where necessary and sometimes not, and we don't just become over-reliant on tech and AI? Because I think we've talked all about it in a nice way, but there is a danger that it can be overused massively, isn't there? And how there is no right answer to this, because I don't think anyone's worked this out. But what are your thoughts and concerns with it? I'll start with you, Shireen, about your thoughts about what is the danger of just offloading everything to AI, and there will be people who are doing that.
Yeah, I could see Julie itching there, so I feel to come forward and say that. So I did a short stint with ITT students who I know wanted to use AI, and I think that there are unintended consequences, of course, of using it. But I think there are two things. I think we possibly need to change the way we assess, because I don't think we can carry on assessing through the way that we do. And actually, this might be the time where oral assessment might come in. So you've written something, and then you've actually got to talk about what you've written and explain it. So, you're still doing the writing, but there's an aspect of assessment where you've got to explain what you do, and we've got to use that and be realistic about that for our older. We're primary, so we can almost, I dare I use it, the word control, but we can almost in the classroom. I know our pupils have one-to-one devices, but we can almost oversee and make sure that they're not using it to generate their pieces of writing. Building on what I think Julie said, in the AI age, it's even more important to teach critical thinking and also to teach children the knowledge that they need in this age, because they need to know the basics. How do you use a capital letter and full stop? How do you know if what you've created within AI is correct? And don't get me wrong, I love AI and I'm not criticizing it. Everybody carry on using it, but sometimes it generates things that you need to have the knowledge to know that it's not quite right. And so I think knowledge of writing is even more important in the age of AI. I think it's really important. And I think we just need to look at how we make our assessments, particularly for university students, knowing that they can use that to generate ideas. So I might build on some of the things that you said, Julie, but those are my initial thoughts from your question, James.
I think it's like anything new which comes in education or kind of in that wider world, everybody on it straight away, and then you've always got the polar opposite views of, oh, this is terrible or this is really useful. And I think, again, we're in that great place where we can do a lot of work with our young people around what's appropriate and not appropriate to use. So we teach AI specifically in our computing curriculum right from year 1 up to year 6, which includes some of that critical look at ethics and bias. And so it's about teaching people how it should be used and shouldn't be used. Yes, it's perfectly, it's great to structure a dissertation using AI if you're not sure about the structure of it, but you still need to go and do the reading and the research and apply that to whatever it is that you've learned. But I think at the moment, that structure isn't there about, it's just like, oh, this is great, I can use it and I can save loads of time. So it is that threat, but I think, we can work starting with our younger age children to really support the change in thought around that.
So how do we change those thoughts? So like you were talking about the knowledge of writing being really critical, we're talking about critical thinking, talking about our assessment, which is a common theme that's coming up in all the conversations I'm having. Do we need to change our assessments that actually writing or examinations isn't the only way? How can we do that? So what do you think are some of the key things that we should be teaching children in this age? And if you had a magic wand and you look at the curriculum, which we always say is overloaded, what do you think are some of the key components that we should have? Because I am a healthy skeptic of AI. Like, I have my role where I'm looking at pedagogy, I'm looking at technology. But I think if we're all that healthy skeptic of it and we can see the advantages of it and we're using it when it's purposeful and when it's not, and we're assessing it. So, but what are some of those key things that we should be teaching at this age? Either one of you, whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I think building on what we're talking about is oracy and it's communication, actually. So having really clear communication skills, doesn't matter how you're communicating, whether it's written or whether it's oral or whether it's through tech. You've really got to have that, and the non-verbal and interpersonal cues as well, and those skills. I mean, Shireen's talked a lot as well about the critical thinking, but that curiosity. So how can you think about what you're being shown by AI if you're not curious about it? How can you think about next steps or develop your learning further if you're not curious about it? So we've really got to be able to do that, and evaluating evidence that was shown. How do we know that's accurate? And I was watching something where AI had rewritten the whole of history, but people couldn't work out why things had changed because it didn't match what their memory was. It was some sci-fi thing I was watching, but that's potentially a real possibility. But you had a big kind of part of the community who weren't curious about, hang on, why does it not match? It was just like, oh, my memory must have gone. So it's really understanding and teaching people to think like that. And those expressive arts, that's another element that we really need to think about. There's been lots kind of in the media around artists, and especially music artists, and about the threat that AI has for them. So it's thinking about how can we support them to develop their skills even further. So they're my initial kind of off the cuff views. I'll hand over to you, Shireen.
I just wanted to build on what Julie said. You see, we're using our oral language now and debate and building on what we've said. I think it's still really important that we do that with children. But we also are looking at developing AI across the curriculum so that it is explicitly taught and that children are, have that knowledge about how to use it safely. So that's definitely something that we are taking on board. But I don't think it's enough for schools and trusts that are keen on technology to take it on board. I do think that it needs to be centrally, needs to be in the national curriculum, and that digital literacy, it's not going away, it's only increasing, and that is taught to pupils. I think that's one of the areas where children need to be safe. Yeah, let's face it, we see children from very young with their little devices. I've probably been guilty as well. I'm trying my best here, James. I get colouring book and pencils now to take out with me. But yeah, we see children with their devices and the very young children, and they know how to use these devices. So I think from very young, we do need to teach children about AI literacy as well. And we also have an approach to AI for staff as well, at different levels. And we also use AI in terms of staffing as well, and have a strategy for it as well in terms of strategic. Because I know Julie and I are both directors of education, so we do need to have that strategic overview as well.
And I think it's quite difficult because we're controlled by the DFE. So, and there's the review going on at the moment, isn't there, around the curriculum? But is that going to go far enough with how we assess children? Is there funding going to be put in around, actually, if we really want to make it equitable, all schools need to have funding for, devices, even if it's not one-to-ones, but some. And I know some schools are being upgraded by the DFE, some aren't, depending on where they are in their improvement journey. That's not equitable either. So I think, it's a much wider piece of work, and we can feed into that. But it has to come from the Department for Education about how we can really move that forward and shake things up completely.
Access to devices is huge, and I was listening to something the other day that something like, okay, we're quite in the UK. If you look at the reports, we've got a lot of devices, but they're not necessarily shared out equitably between the schools. And if you look at somewhere like America, they've got 80. I think it's like something. I need to go and read it again because I can't believe the differences. They said something about 88% of children have devices, but over here it's about 33%. Well, actually, when we're talking about devices, I know from both of you, they're not on the devices all the time. The quality of the exercise books and what they're writing and what they're producing has been phenomenal. And I've seen the work both you've done before, and there's other educators in the country who do the same. And I think, but having the access to that device, so they have that world around them that they can go and research or go and find their passion, or take art or music or something else. My son's learning drums. Luckily, it's electronic drum kit, and he hasn't got his own just yet. He's got a quiet practice pad, but it won't be long. But actually being able to, that he records and then he can listen it back. Just that act of being able to, that metacognition of listening to something and go back again, I know we talked about with Oracy, is huge. And we want children where, let's say, knowledge is that you can go and access this knowledge, whether it's right or wrong, and we've got that critical thinking goes through it. Actually, the devices help, but we need to find their passion and how they learn as well. So it's a real interesting time that we live in, isn't it? And we've already talked about AI, saying that, is it going to revolutionize? Well, when they brought the calculator in, everyone was scared. But actually, it's allowed us to do maths in more depth and do things that we wouldn't have been able to do before. So what are your hopes then for the future and where you want to be? I know that's it's like wave magic wand. What would you want? But what would you hope that like the DFE or schools consider thinking about this in the future? Because I think that's quite a nice way of phrasing it and looking at it. Julie, do you want to start?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the digital devices, it's the accessibility tools. So, there's children who are using accessibility tools that we didn't know needed accessibility tools until they've been trained and can do it themselves. And suddenly there's a huge improvement in their work and their engagement. And my strong belief is that the DFE should fund one-to-one devices. So, a flat fee, if you look at places like there's some Falkirk, I think it is, and Glasgow, Scottish Borders do one-to-one, and they pay for that as a local authority. So, and I think Guernsey were looking at it. I don't know if they've gone down that route yet, but if the DFE could fund every school like a minimum amount of, this is what we're giving you for a device. If you want to buy a different device, which is more expensive, then you fund that difference. That's up to you. That's your pedagogical decision. But actually every school should have that. So then there's no expectation of, some schools ask parents to contribute. Well, our schools can't afford that, and we would never ask our parents to do that. So it's taking away that postcode lottery. But if the DFE are really serious about digital advancement, that's what they have to do, and then we can look at schooling differently. So, if you think about children with emotional based school avoidance, why are we really pushing them to get into school when they can't do that? Well, we can have a hybrid model. So we've still got our eyes on them with a safeguarding point of view, and we're teaching them online because it's the physical building with some of those children that stops them from accessing their learning, so it's thinking really differently and being given permission, in inverted commas, to try different things as trusts or schools, where we can really make sure that we're truly inclusive of all those children. That's my Miss World speech over.
Beautiful. What do you think, Shireen? What's your wish?
Yeah, I agree with Julie. I think all schools should have pupils should have access, particularly at Key Stage 2, to one-to-one devices. I mean, our children have it from year 1 upwards, and again, they're not just passively looking at the screen. For any of you who are possibly skeptics, they're using it to enhance their learning and where relevant. For me, I think in terms of government, it's investing in the infrastructure. There's no point in having a one-to-one device if you don't have the internet. So, I've travelled down to schools. I call it the countryside. It's not. It's just because I live in London. So anything that goes past, you see the cows and wave to them. And then you get to the school and your phone doesn't work. And some schools, they don't even have the internet there. So it's about the infrastructure and making sure that schools, particularly in rural areas, are connected. So we need that first, because there's no point having a one-to-one device if it actually isn't going to work. So I think investing in the infrastructure first, making sure that all parts of the country are, as you call it, wired up, and then having that access to one-to-one devices, particularly the assistive tech aspect for pupils, particularly those with special educational needs and disabilities, that they are able to have dignity in their learning through that PedTech approach. So echoing again what Julie said, and just going back one step and really investing in that infrastructure. I also have a different hat as well, because I absolutely love reading and writing. So again, encouraging in the curriculum statements around talk. How do you talk in science, in history and geography? That would enhance the curriculum. I've fed into the curriculum review, so I think my thoughts are known. And just making sure that digital literacy is an entitlement for all children, not just those schools who are interested, because that's the future and that's the world that we're moving into. So lots there, but if we can get that infrastructure right, then we can really get pupils that equity, that equity in learning, so that they can make the most progress.
And I think what is very clear is you've both been on this journey, you're both thinking very strategically around this. But going back to your point earlier, Julie, it is a postcode lottery around the country, depending where you are, and having the strategic understanding of, yes, you need the infrastructure, you need not only just the broadband, but also the safety mechanisms of how you're going to filter, how you're going to monitor it, what the switching's like. So when you add devices on top of that, you know it's going to work in a safe environment. And that is a difficult thing for an educator to get their head around, and as a leader, and have the capacity to do it right. But the moment you have that, and going from, let's say, pockets of devices all over to one-to-one, the jump is huge. And I've seen that in terms of CPD and accessibility in particular. And using the phrase, Shireen, that you said earlier, it's necessary for some, but it's useful for all. And the amount of classrooms I've been in recently where they've got coloured overlays already on the device, that's really helping them, and being able, and everyone has personalised their device to them to help them learn in some way or another. So I want you to both think of one point, and all my listeners struggle, all my guests struggle with this. What's one point that you want to leave our listeners with, and for them to think about or consider about moving forward? Because we've talked a lot around oracy, technology, writing, across the curriculum. We talked about the digital literacy that's needed in there. But what's one thing, if you got a listener who's like really engaged, like what's their next step in some ways? But before I do that, have you subscribed to our newsletter yet? It's called Soundbites and Insights, and it's delivered to 10,000 educators a week. It contains a curated selection of the 4 standout TTR shows in the week, exclusive discounts, and offers from our sponsors. So if you want to hear more about all the other Teachers Talk radio shows from across the network, please go to ttradio.org/newsletter. Julie, what's that one thing you want to say to our listeners for them to go away?
One thing. Well, as you guessed, I'm not very good at keeping things succinct. So it's a longish long thing. So lead with pedagogy. So that's the real key, not with curriculum, and be intentional about a problem that you're trying to solve and use pilot. We use pilot, prove and scale. So it's always that thought of, does this improve outcomes, engagement and equity? And if the answer is no, don't do it, but lead with that pedagogy first. That was almost one point.
Get away with it. Go on, Shireen.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a school improvement lens. So think about your why. Why are you doing this? And it does build on what Julie said. And if you think about that, you focus on the teaching and learning and how it's going to benefit pupils, then that should be the driver. That's what you evaluate. That's what you look at, and take your staff with you, collaborate, make sure that they are aware, make sure they know the evidence so that you can take staff with you. So just building on what Julie said, but just really why, what's the why? Why are you doing this? And that's what keeps you going.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shireen, and thank you, Julie, for what has been a fascinating conversation. And I know this will continue offline, as we will all three are very interested in the same thing. So I know that will continue as well. So thank you both for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having us. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having us, James. Thank you.
So thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Late Show with James Radburn, right here on Teachers Talk Radio. We hope today's conversation sparked you in new ways about talk, writing, and the evolving role of technology in education. If you've got thoughts, questions, or if you want to keep the conversation going, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We're at TT Radio Official on X. I keep trying to call it Twitter, but it's not. Or head to our website, www.ttradio.org. And if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on there on whatever platform of choice you want. There's plenty more insights, debate, and practical wisdom coming your way on Teachers Talk Radio. And thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused